Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. We're now on part 2 of our story, and we're going to find out tonight why it is that Meryl's husband has been cast under a shadow of suspicion. And did he have anything to do with his best friend's disappearance? We're about to find out. And let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight.
Oh, but I do, Meryl. I need to share this story with you, because you are going to be my wife one day. And I don't want to start our relationship by keeping any secrets from you. You think I'm going to be your wife one day? Meryl had asked, confounded. Isn't that a little bit presumptuous of you, Matt Blackburn? Is it? He'd asked. Is it presumptuous to know what feels right? Meryl had been taken aback by Matt's fortuitous comments. He was declaring it as a fact that they would one day be married, as if it was already preordained and written in the stars, to such an extent that Meryl actually believed that they would be married, because Matt Blackburn was so certain about it. She liked the way the successful surgeon approached life with such certainty and conviction, knowing exactly what he wanted, and pursuing his ambitious goals, never even for a moment being intimidated by insurmountable odds that could potentially be stacked up against him, or engaging in even a brief measure of doubt. Isn't that how we should all approach our lives, without worrying how we will ultimately achieve our goals, but believing that we will achieve them regardless? When Matt had purchased Marden Hall for the couple, shortly after they were married, he had been resolutely determined to buy the property, despite the daunting cost of the place, that they could ill afford at the time, but against all the odds he had masterfully accomplished his goal, as he always did, and made it happen, as if he'd hit that perfect hole-in-one on the golf course, and never ever looked back. Ostensibly, in the surgical theatre where Matt Blackburn operated on his patients, he used the same measure of certainty, always believing in a successful outcome in all his procedures, even when some of the challenges he faced were more than a little overwhelming. So he was an excellent surgeon with a very steady hand that was much loved by his grateful patients and admired by the medical establishment. He was responsible for inviting medical students into his surgery to learn from his skillful mastery. Meryl, whom had always been a little flighty, like a nervous bird flying away at the first sign of a cat ferreting around the yard, found being married to Matt had grounded her, tethering her to her life like a boat safely anchored into its mooring spot. Matt, who was so sure of himself, confident without being cocky, self-assured without being arrogant, assertive without being pushy, had always made her feel safe, and that's one of the things she loved about her husband most. Where she doubted, he believed, and when she was anxious about something, his confidence that was always unfailing would win her over. He was like the antiseptic ointment to all her bumps and bruises that she had acquired in life. He eased them all away. So they were a perfect couple in every sense of the word. "Go on," Meryl had said to Matt, taking a big bite of her juicy steak, chewing it slowly to savour all the buttery, peppery flavours that melted in her mouth. "This steak is delicious, Matt. Now you must tell me, why did the police suspect that you had anything to do with Adam McFreese's disappearance? That's insane. I only have to look at you to know that you are a very good man, Matt Blackburn. But clearly the police echo my sentiments, as you would not be enjoying this delicious steak dinner with me otherwise, would you? They obviously have no evidence against you. And even if Adam McFreese was your best friend, it certainly doesn't mean you had anything to do with his disappearance, does it?" "I appreciate your faith in me, Meryl," said Matt. "Let's just say it's complicated. A day before my best friend Adam McFreese vanished, I was seen threatening him. I told him I would kill him if he went anywhere near Tara Hewitt. Unfortunately, Tara wantonly cheated on me with Adam. I didn't take it at all well, I'm afraid. I was furious, absolutely furious, incandescent with rage I was. At the time, Adam and I shared a student digs together, with 4 other girls. One of the girls never liked me. Her name was Angie. She told the police about my heated altercation with Adam McFreese, how I'd threatened to kill the man. But I'd been venting, letting off steam like you do. I mean, you can tell someone you want to kill them, without actually meaning it. But if a couple of days later the person in question that you threatened goes missing, it certainly does not look good. I can assure you Adam used similar words on me when I fired him up. It is what we would do. And he knew my words meant nothing, but she was quite the stirrer, she was. It wasn't uncommon for Adam and me to have disputes, but we always made up in the end. We were very, very good friends, as close as brothers we were. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of Adam. I was devastated by his disappearance. The police falsely assumed that out of a jealous rage, I had brazenly killed my best friend, so that he would not impose a threat on my relationship with Tara Hewitt, that by that stage had already fallen apart. They implied I wanted him out of the way, and willfully disposed of his body when I went camping with him and 3 other medical students. I mean, have you ever heard anything so mindlessly ridiculous in all your life? The police were so predictable, believing the very worst of me, insisting that I definitely had something to hide. I told them I liked Tara a lot, but that my friendship with Adam McFreese, that went way back, was significantly more important than my relationship with Tara. Yes, she was a pretty girl. Yes, I was fond of her. Yes, I liked her a lot. But Adam and I were best friends since I'd been knee-high to a grasshopper. He was like a brother to me. And at the end of the day, neither of us would let a girl come between us. We even made a pact once about that a long time ago. We both agreed, if we ever liked the same girl, we would literally leave that girl well alone and not pursue any relationship with her, out of respect for each other. I remember Adam telling me that Tara was not his type. He liked her sense of humour. So our little dispute was like water under the bridge to us. But the police did not see it like that. At the time, they were grasping at straws, asking me to tell them what I had done to Adam McFreese. I want to tell you the detectives interviewing me were like dogs with bones, determined to get a confession out of me. Do you know, I never used to understand how some people would confess to crimes they did not commit. Now I know why it can happen. It is exhausting being hounded by the police. It is almost easier to say, yes, I did it. Now please leave me alone. You're giving me a headache. At the time, my father got me a lawyer. A very good one at that. Michelle Diker was her name. That woman was formidable. The detectives were intimidated by her. She wasn't called the Rottweiler for nothing. She could bite, that was for sure. She told them that they couldn't question me any further, and they promptly shut up. Their interrogations were shut down. But it was a very difficult time for me. I genuinely thought I'd end up being locked away for life, for something I never did. And believe me, I guarantee it happens more times than we care to imagine. But one of the police detectives told me my body language was not like that of a guilty man. He believed in my innocence, at least.
So you're telling me, Matt, that one of the detectives really believed that you murdered Adam McFreese? That's crazy, said Merrill. Matt nodded sadly. I'm afraid so. He thinks I might have had a brawl with Adam, and either accidentally or intentionally have killed him, and guilefully disposed of his body. Of course, the lake on the campground was searched by divers, but Adam's body was never found. So without a body, the police didn't have any solid evidence. So no one knew exactly what had become of him. So what do you think happened to your friend Adam, Matt? Do you think a stranger, possibly staying near the campground, abducted him during the night?
Or what about a wild animal, like a mountain lion, or an animal like that, a bear even, that could have snatched him potentially? Anything is possible, is it not? There are so many missing people that disappear all over America every year, especially in national parks, and no one has any idea what became of them.
Matt Blackburn's brow furrowed.
That's the $101 question, Merrill. I have no idea what became of Adam McFreese. We had a very pleasant night camping. The following morning, Adam had vanished into thin air. No one saw what became of him. 5 of us medical students had been camping very happily together on a camping ground overlooking a magnificently large lake bursting with fish, close to the Chattahoochee National Forest, which is east of the Mississippi River. Just so you know, the forest spans 750,000 acres of mountainous terrain in North Georgia. It's spectacular, wild and rugged, everything you could want for a camping trip. We were all having the time of our lives, looking for an escape where we could drink beers together, go fishing, and barbecue over a fire pit. We'd been planning the trip for quite some time, and were looking extremely forward to it. Adam and I shared a tent together. The other 3 men shared another tent. Our tents were next to each other, and alongside the 2 trucks we had driven to the campground. It had been such a beautiful, peaceful trip. We were camped by this lake, surrounded by a plethora of trees. It was idyllic, and the next morning Adam mysteriously vanished.
That is incredibly weird. I wonder what did become of Adam McFreese. It's an extraordinary story, it really is. I mean, people don't disappear off the face of the earth, do they, without explanation? But they appear to, because if you look at all those 411 cases, no one ever knows what became of all those people. I suppose I can kind of understand why the police would focus their attention on you, given your fallout with Adam over a girlfriend. But I absolutely know they were barking up the wrong tree there. Matt nodded. They sure were. Even my friends on the trip assured the police we were no longer fighting anymore. I had been talking about breaking up with Tara Hewitt before Adam even got involved with her. I was beginning to think that we didn't have much in common, but the detective did not listen to any of that. I remember after my interview with the police, this one detective that was laying into me unreasonably hard was looking at me and saying, "One day we'll find out the truth, Matt Blackburn, and then we'll lock you away in prison and throw away the key. You won't get away with this, young man. The truth will come out in the end. It has a nasty way of showing up when you least suspect it. So this isn't over, Matt, by a long shot. You're going to need to watch your back from now on." Merrill grimaced as she reflected over what her husband Matt had told her about Adam McFreese's disappearance all those long years ago, and lo and behold, a detective now wanted to speak to him again about the case after all this time. She had a horrifying, unsettling feeling in her gut that this case was not going to go away any time soon, and that the past was being excavated, rather like an ancient piece of pottery after an archaeological dig, which could mean only one thing: some new evidence had come to light, or something to draw attention to this case. Or it could be that the police were going over old case files in order to make a conviction by re-interviewing everyone that was around at the time of Adam's disappearance, and checking to see if their statements still aligned after all these years. Matt had returned home later that evening. He had missed dinner, but that was not a surprise, as he was often called in for emergency surgeries, or sometimes saw patients after hours. But normally he would breeze in after a day at work, looking as fresh as he did when he first left the house. Merrill had envied her husband doing a job that he loved so much, that paid their bills, and gifted his life with so much purpose. It had made her realize that she needed to find something more meaningful to do with her life, And now that her daughter Frida had left for college in Boston, if she didn't find something purposeful to do, she'd go out of her mind with boredom. She had happily given up her career when she'd married her husband Matt to take care of their daughter Frida, something she had never regretted for a single moment. But after Frida had left for college earlier on in the day, Malden Hall suddenly seemed alarmingly empty. This evening, when he entered the house, Matt, who always was well presented and took great pride in his appearance, looked like something manky that the cat had dragged in, that was only half alive. There were dark smudges under his eyes that shadowed his face, and he looked bruised and deflated. Merrill noticed he hadn't even bothered to change out of his light blue scrubs, and in his scruffy, bedraggled state, she knew something was amiss. She didn't have to guess why her husband's feathers were so ruffled. No doubt the detective whom arrived at her door earlier in the morning had made his unwelcome presence known at the surgery, and had likely set the cat among the pigeons. Worse still, what must the medical professionals and nursing staff have lightly thought about the fortuitous arrival of a detective seeking Matt Blackburn out, who was a respected orthopedic surgeon, to take him in for questioning? It wasn't a good look, and she could only imagine the idle rumours, wild speculation probably circulating around frenziedly at the hospital like an unwelcome smell. "You must be starving, sweetheart," Merrill had said to her husband, unable to hide the concern in her voice. "I tell you what, how about I rustle you up some of that baked ham with potato salad?" "I'm not hungry," Matt said, folding Merrill lovingly into his arms and giving her a tight, lingering hug, like a fragile small boy hanging on to his mother for dear life. "The police came over to the house today," said Merrill tentatively. "A detective seems to be asking questions about Adam McFreese's vanishing. Would you believe it? They're actually unearthing the old case again after all these years. It's so ridiculous, honestly. Have they not got better things to do with their time? It's completely insane." Merrill's husband shrugged his shoulders and meandered across the kitchen floor towards the large upright refrigerator, which wobbled precariously as he threw open the door abruptly, pulling out a large bottle of half-open Sauvignon Blanc, and poured himself a large crystal goblet of wine. "I know. The detective paid me a call. He asked me a whole lot of questions." Merrill studied her husband as his hand began to shake violently. One thing she admired about Matt was his sturdy hand, which was a prerequisite for a surgeon, but tonight his hand was wobbling and shaking like someone with Parkinson's disease. She watched her husband drink back the wine like Kool-Aid and waved a precautionary hand in the air. "Don't drink too much, sweetheart. You've got surgery in the morning. You're going to have to operate on patients. You can't afford to drink." I know, her husband said obsequiously, "but I need to calm down. I've had quite a day today. A terrible, terrible day. Would you believe it? The police have found remains. Human remains on the camping ground. About half a mile away from where we pitched our tents on that weekend 25 years ago. Can you bloody believe it? I need all this like I need a hole in my head." Merrill inhaled sharply, her body freezing with fear. "You saying they found human remains? I mean, how is that possible after all this time if it is Adam? I mean, surely there'd be nothing left of the body. You are joking, are you not?" "I wish I was. I know finding the body will bring closure to Adam's family. What there is left of it, of course. And for that I'm very glad. But for the four of us camping on that campground, it invariably opens up a whole can of worms and places a cloud of suspicion over all of us, most especially me, given that dispute I had over that girlfriend of mine, Tara Hewitt. The police have affirmed that the remains did belong to Adam McFreese, so they're going to interrogate all four of us that were camping together that weekend. So it looks like we have some rosy times ahead of us." Merrill shook her head sorrowfully. as she tried to assimilate the information that was clawing away in her guts. They did not need this intrusive interference in their lives. Why did all this stuff have to resurface again after all these years, like a landfill site being dug up? "The police have found Adam McCrease's body. After all this time," she repeated. "But how can this be?" As if reading her thoughts, Adam said, "I'm afraid the campground is building a bathroom and shower facility. And lo and behold, the construction crew unearthed the bones of Adam McCrease. He had been buried in a shallow grave. His bones were badly decomposed, but they used dental records to identify him. The police believe he was murdered and have evidence to prove his death was no accident. So they've been sniffing around me like a cadaver dog over a dead corpse, let's say, asking all kinds of questions. I didn't tell you this, but they took me into the station and were hurling all kinds of accusations at me about how angry I was with Adam McCrease and his so-called interest in my girlfriend at the time, Tara Hewitt. How I wanted to extract my revenge on him because he was interested in Tara. I told him they were talking baloney and that I was beginning to have doubts about my relationship with Tara in the first place. But I might as well have been talking to a brick wall. They have their own preconceived ideas about what happened." "So they're going over the same ground again?" asked Merrill. "This is a nightmare. Do you think they're suspicious of you?" "Did you listen to a word I said, sweetheart? Or are you completely mute? Of course they're suspicious of me. I told you I'm their lead suspect in this investigation. They cannot fathom how 4 of us could have been camping together and not heard a thing during the night. I assured them that we went to bed quite bladdered that night. We didn't hear anything as a result. The speculation was that Adam might have met a deadly fate with a wild animal. But now that his deceased body has been unearthed, the police are looking at me again. So I've organized a lawyer, a man called Robert Baxter. He soon shut the police up. He's a formidable lawyer, but they're not going to let this go, Merrill. That inspector is hungry to make an arrest. I could feel it in my bones. And the way he was looking at me, it was like one of those vultures hovering over a deceased animal, waiting to shred it apart. The man is convinced I killed my best friend." Merrill stared at her husband incredulously, unable to move or even breathe. She couldn't believe how when she got up in the morning, the worst thing she had to face was her daughter leaving home. But now her husband could potentially be arrested for a murder he had not committed, and Merrill knew her husband could never have harmed a fly. But the police would never listen. They wanted to solve crimes, even if it meant arresting the wrong person. And she had to help her husband in any way she could, and she would stop at nothing to find answers, even if it killed her. The following morning, when Merrill climbed out of bed, she felt as if someone had slammed a pickaxe into her head. She had a thunderous headache, brought on by the stress of the last 24 hours. She sat up bolt upright, realizing that Mr. Dogood was lying at her feet, on the large king-size bed. Normally the dog was relegated to the basket in the far corner of the bedroom, but today he was welcome on her bed. She needed his comforting presence. She reached out to stroke his soft fur, noticing that prisms of sunlight danced through a little crack in the curtain. She could see specks of dust caught up in the light. She realized her husband was long gone. The house suddenly seemed vacuously empty. She pulled out a packet of pills from a drawer in her bedside table, knocking back a couple of Tylenol at the back of her throat with a tumbler of water that rested on the nightstand. She'd love nothing better in the world than to crawl under her duvet covers and hide from the day, so that this dreadful nightmare could be willfully washed away by the ocean currents of her dreams. But she knew she needed to drag herself out of bed to get the day finally started. There was no way her husband was going to be falsely accused of something he had not done, which could potentially be a very real possibility. She'd heard enough about people who'd spent years in prison when they were innocent of the crime that they'd been falsely accused of committing. She'd be damned if that was going to happen to her husband. She had lost her daughter to college in Boston. She did not want to lose her husband to a life spent in prison behind bars. Meryl knew what she needed to do. She needed to nip this in the bud right now, before things got out of hand. Meryl's cell phone was flashing with messages from her daughter that she briefly scanned. "Hi, Mum! Arrived in Boston. Everything's great. We drove non-stop, barely any breaks along the way. Absolutely exhausted. Speak to you soon when I've recovered. Love you, Mum. Hope you're not too worried about us." Right now, Frida was the last concern on Meryl's mind. "I've got to get moving," she told Mr. Dogood, who stared at her through his black eyes and woofed a couple of times as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" Meryl didn't take much pride in her appearance that morning. What she looked like was the least of her concerns. She threw on a pair of black pants and a black cashmere sweater, along with a pair of short low-heeled boots with a silver buckle and a string of pearls to complete the look. She stared at her pale complexion in the mirror and realized that she looked almost as pitiful and pathetic as her husband did. If she thought her husband looked a sorry sight last night, she was not doing much better herself. The weight of her worry had sucked the colour out of her skin, and the vacant, haunted face that stared back at her in the bathroom mirror was one she barely recognized at all. No amount of makeup would lightly conceal the black circles of worry under her eyes, and a large pimple that had manifested in the middle of her chin overnight. Like a lonely island. Meryl had not had a pimple in many years, since she was a teenager, but this nasty red, angry pustule seemed determined to be as conspicuous as possible. It was an ugly thing, mirroring the ugly misfortune of recent events. Meryl tried to make herself look halfway decent by putting some lipstick on her lips, but it did little to glamorize her pinched, vacuous look, but seemed only to accentuate the ruddiness of her ashen complexion. She ran a brush swiftly through her long brown hair, that seemed particularly tangled today, almost as if everything she touched was conspiring against her to make her life as difficult as possible. Meryl trudged down the long creaking staircase with her purse in her hands, and Mr. Dogood bounding ebulliently at her side. He was watching her every move, with a look of concern on his face, as if he knew his owner was going through the dark night of the soul, and he had great empathy for her, reaching out with a paw to console her, as if sensing her grievous melancholia. Meryl proceeded to bang around her large kitchen, rather clumsily. It seemed such a mission just to make coffee for herself this morning. Everything took superhuman effort, while she contemplated what she was going to do. The coffee scalded her tongue, burning the insides of her mouth, as she drank it piping hot, far too fast, without giving it time to cool down, as such was her haste to get her day started. She'd go and visit Chancellor Miller, who was a cosmetic surgeon, dealing with a wealthy clientele, intent on improving their appearances, with a nip here and a tuck there. She needed to speak to all the men that were camping that night with her husband. They must remember something that could persuade the police that her husband, Matt, had absolutely nothing to do with the death of Adam McFreese. When she arrived at the surgery consulting rooms, with its elegant marble floors and upholstered front desk, there was an elegant young woman in reception, with blonde hair pulled away from her face in a glamorous bun. The woman was impeccably dressed, wearing a very smart suit, without a single hair out of place. The woman eyed Meryl with the same kind of disapproval you would if your cat vomited over the couch. She gave Meryl the once-over with an abrasive look in her cold, hard brown eyes. She looked like the kind of woman who had grown up self-entitled and had little empathy for anyone beyond herself. She scowled at Meryl, her eyes focusing on the big pimple in the middle of her chin, with an expression of abject disgust on her face, as if Meryl had some kind of leprosy that she didn't want to catch. "Yes," she snapped brusquely. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Dr. Miller," said Meryl. "I must see him now as a matter of urgency." "And who are you?" asked the woman impertinently, with her perfectly tattooed eyebrows twitching like a pair of cat whiskers. "I'm Dr. Blackburn's wife, Meryl. It's very important that I speak to him now." The woman annoyingly began to tap her long, elegant pink fingernails on the counter, almost as if she was playing the piano. "I'm sorry," she said, with a smug, self-satisfied expression on her face, "but Dr. Miller is booked up today. He can't possibly see you now, I'm afraid. So if you want to book a consultation, you should have booked an appointment weeks ago," she said pointedly. "Dr. Miller is a sought-after surgeon. You're going to have to wait until he's got a spare opening in his diary. I'll take down your details and be in touch. What is your contact number?" she asked. Meryl didn't need the young woman putting obstacles in her path, like those orange and white plastic cones that the police use on the highway to slow down the traffic, so she did something rather outrageously impulsive that surprised even her. She bolted past the surprised receptionist, down the passage to a door marked Dr. Chancellor Miller. She gently pushed open the door, and for a brief moment she stood there like a stationary waxwork statue, staring in awe at the consultation, with a curious intrigue, almost forgetting for a moment why she'd come to see Chancellor in the first place. For a while doctor and patient were caught up in an intense dialogue, and were blindly oblivious to Meryl's presence in the consulting room. Dr. Miller had a selection of breast implants strewn across his walnut desk, from smallest to largest, which he was showing his patient. The woman was bouncing an implant in her hand that was so massive it almost made Meryl faint with astonishment. Were there really some women willing to put water balloons in their body, she wondered in horror. What was the world coming to? The woman looked like she'd been through numerous surgeries. Her skin was as taut as a reptile's, devoid of wrinkles, and her lips were much plumper and fuller than they should have been. There was nothing natural about her physical appearance, and everything about her reeked of privilege and money, from the skin-tight leopard-print catsuit she was wearing, to the determined, spoilt, petulant look on her face. Meryl could almost imagine this woman as a child, stamping her foot while her parents ran around her, giving in to her every whim, saying, "Yes, dear, of course, dear, anything you want, dear." Meryl imagined her husband was much the same, for it would seem this was the kind of woman you didn't say no to. And it was likely that Dr. Miller was having a tough time making the woman see sense, as if he was wading with her in a pond full of tumbleweeds. "I want to go as big as possible, Dr. Miller," the woman snapped indignantly. "Why are you not listening to me, doctor? If you won't do the surgery, I'll go to someone else. I hear Dr. Ernest Rodriguez has an excellent reputation. I could always go to him. A friend of mine did, and she's very satisfied with the results. I told you I like these large implants," she said, bouncing the oversized implant in her hand possessively. "I like these ones. This is going to give me an incredible cleavage, and my husband is going to absolutely love it." Dr. Miller frowned. "I'm giving you honest advice, Mrs. Friesemann. I really am. You're not a very big woman, nor are you getting any younger. A very large breast implant like this is going to make you look comical, like a caricature in a cartoon. Do you really want that? You don't want people to know you've had surgery. I like my surgeries to look au naturel, that even your husband will not notice you've had work done on yourself. Less is definitely more, Mrs. Friesemann. I cannot stress that strongly enough. I've been doing surgeries for a long time. I know what I'm talking about. If your bust is too big, you might look rather matronly, overweight if you like, and your clothes won't hang on you well. Why do you think Vogue models have no breasts? The designers know this fact. These breast implants will make you look top-heavy, and as you're not a young woman anymore, you might look rather silly. Some people might make fun of you behind your back. Do you really want that? How dare you, Dr. Miller, talk to me as if I don't know what I'm doing? I want the large implants. I'm paying you for the surgery. You've given me your advice, I've listened to it, but I want the large breasts, and I'm not settling for smaller ones. I'm sorry, but I'm not. I have my reputation to consider, Mrs. Friesemann. People will ask you who did your surgery for you,
and I will be looked upon as giving you lousy advice, or encouraging you to have a surgery that has not benefited your appearance in any way." All of a sudden, patient and doctor seem to sense they're not alone in the room, and Dr. Miller looks up to see Merrill standing there, gawking at them, while his receptionist was apologetically standing behind her in the doorway, waving her arm in the air. "I'm sorry, Dr. Miller. I tried to stop her, but this woman just barged past me in reception. I told her you were busy, but she refused to listen. She insisted on seeing you." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. I look forward to you joining me for part 3 tomorrow night. It's getting very exciting, so I look forward to seeing you then. Until next time, goodbye, good night.